morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, and welcome to Graduation Day. I hope you have your caps and gowns ready, as in about an hour from now, you will have earned your Middle East Maven degree. This lecture series was designed as a political review and analysis of the Middle East, with a quest to understand whether, based on current dynamics, it is headed forward toward an era of regional cooperation and collaboration to address the region's most existential challenges and exploit the opportunities for the region to end years of wars and conflict in pursuit of the elusive peace. In prior lectures, we focused on mostly political issues. Broadly defined, these are issues that are solvable within the purview of the regional political regimes in each of the Middle East countries. If left to politicians whose top priority is always regime survival and personal enrichment, for which the instruments of governing are mostly coercive and corrupt, this will lead you to believe that the Middle East is doomed. In this lecture, we are focusing on common regional challenges that are beyond the control of the present regimes, for which they have no instruments of governing. These are external factors like climate change, resource scarcity, uncontrollable by any one nation, and the human suffering of the population for which they do not have the financial resources to address and which represent the major threat to their regimes, people power. Our thesis is that only cooperation, collaboration amongst the regional states in return for ending the civil, tribal conflicts and historical grievances holds the forward solution in the best interest of the regimes and their citizens. We're seeing more of a paradigm shift in inter-regional relations that keeps us, for the first time in decades, more optimistic that by sheer necessity the Middle East is moving forward. Let's see if you agree. So is this going to happen in our lifetime? Even the scholars cannot agree. You've seen this list of megatrends in a prior lecture. There is little we can do to avoid the ominous trends on this list. In our lecture today, we will focus on two. The youth bulge will not yet be absorbed and may have major effects absent a profound political change, and diminishing governability of Middle East nation-states. The latter is a clear reference to the inability of existing regimes to manage the consequences of external, mainly economic and environmental conditions that will force even oppressive regimes to listen to the people and reform the societies. But as always, accidents and strategic surprises will probably happen. Some of those factors that are reaching a state of diminishing governability are illustrated in a recent study done by PwC. Do not bother to read the small print except for the highlights. 40% of the region's population are under 25. Rapid urbanization, 85% in the Gulf states, and exploding cities in Saudi Arabia, hence NEOM, and Egypt, hence building a yet unnamed new administration city 45 kilometers from Cairo. Shift in economic power is a reference to the diminishing demand for oil and the diminishing oil revenues that are the lifeblood of the oil-rich countries in the region, and of course climate change and resource scarcity. These are the main challenges for which existing regimes have only diminished capacity to address. Of course, and especially in the midst of, hopefully close to the end, of the worst global pandemic in 100 years, the post-COVID-19 economic recovery will be the top priority for the regimes which can only be fueled by infrastructure investments, job creation, and regional trade relations. As James Carville said in 1992, it's the economy, stupid.
We are organizing with the four main organizers, which are Paris 1, IEDS, Harriet Watt University, Oxford University, and Sciences Po de Lille. We are all organizing a 2-day conference about the research initiatives on the economics of the Middle East. And it's addressing important priorities of the EU Med region, issues like the political economy, migration and refugees has an important share, firms' behavior, industrial policies and political economy.
The main objective is to have young researchers talking about the main issues in the region that could help policymakers, but also could help the public think about the main issue, and also create this network so that the researchers can work together, start projects together.
There are more than 45 people attending. We have more than 20 papers and we have a large amount of young researchers who are participating, discussing, debating, and I'm sure it will be a very interesting 2-day conference.
We're going to present a paper on an assessment of the competition policy in the Arab region. Using firm level data, and basically what we try to do is we construct an index trying to contrast the difference between the de facto and the de jure competition policy. In other words, to what extent there is a difference in the rules and their implementation.
We've decided to work on this topic because we believe that this is a policy that has particular benefits for developing countries, including Arab countries. When we've contrasted findings from the implementation assessment and the rules assessment, we found that Egypt and Tunisia, they had better results on their implementation index compared to their rules index. And on the contrary for Jordan and Morocco.
Here we are presenting a paper on an unexpected instability event and internal migration in Egypt. The results of this paper show that when the number of unexpected events it increases, it's associated by the internal migration, it increases in Egypt as the people are trying always to leave the places where there is instability events. By the end, there is an agglomeration in the main cities that are more secured by the Egyptian governorate. So as a political economy, the paper proposes to guarantee security in these places, so it reduces sometimes the pressure on the main cities in Egypt that are very secure.
Today we've had great presentations on different topics of migration, which is my field of research, and I really enjoyed all the presentations, and the quality of the papers is really great, and I'm looking forward for the rest of the day, and I'm sure the next day as well is going to be very fruitful.
Notwithstanding the economic toll of the pandemic on all of the Middle East, there are two countries that are on the verge of collapse. They are Lebanon and Yemen, and to a large degree Syria. SWOT is mostly used in business, and of course it stands for strength, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. It is a gross oversimplification to assess the entire Middle East with just one word in each of those categories. But the history of the Middle East has proven time and again that the region and its population are extremely resilient. That if it were not for millennials of conflict and wars creating a constant state of instability, the region is facing a period of great opportunities, but ones that can only be achieved through regional cooperation. And ironically, the major threat to the region has traditionally come from interference by foreign powers. Left to its own devices, the region is capable of addressing the main external and internal challenges, as you see in this chart. So let's begin by understanding the major challenges facing the Middle East region as a whole. We begin with population growth. With all the death and destruction of regional and domestic civil wars, the population growth is still the largest in the world. From a total of 432 million in 2007, it is projected to grow by 50% by the year 2050. With the exception of the Palestinians and Lebanese, the population growth is consistently high in almost every regional country. Curbing population growth in a region generally characterized by conservative, religiously influenced cultures is a monumental task. However, it seems that certain regimes, even in Saudi Arabia, are considering reforms, even in the face of resistance from religious leaders and institutions. Solutions exist, but only social reforms, education, and incentive could bring about significant change. It has been tried in other countries, but it's still a long shot in the Middle East. Incredible solutions to overpopulation exist, such as better education, one of the first measures to implement policies reflecting social change, education of girls and children, making people aware of family planning, tax benefit or concessions, knowledge of sex education, and communication, social marketing. But we're yet to see significant changes of this kind taking place in the Middle East. As you can see, the majority percentage of the population in the region are between 20 and 30 years old. They, for the most part, are well educated, skilled, and seeking opportunities for growth. If well organized, as we have seen them do so during the Arab Spring in 2011, they have the power to topple regimes. Regimes are well aware of it, and their instruments of coercion are insufficient to stem the tide. 31% is the median of fully capable but unemployed youth, and they are destined to become the change agents in most countries in the Middle East.
The number of college graduates in the Middle East and North Africa is expected to reach 30 million by 2020. But the region's economies are not generating enough high-skilled jobs for this increasingly well-educated population. This leads to frustration and a waste of valuable human potential. More than 140 million quality jobs need to be created by 2022 for youth entering the MENA labor market. How can this be done? Like reaching the moon, it will take a huge effort, to create a new economy that delivers more and better opportunities for the region's youth. The most promising approach for the Arab world is to embrace the digital economy and create a culture of creativity, innovation, and risk-taking. To get there, countries need to set ambitious goals. By 2022, everyone should have access to broadband internet and have systems in place to make digital payments the norm, with new rules designed to encourage innovation as well as guarantee the security of transactions. Young people in the Middle East and North Africa are well educated and tech-savvy. They're already online. By embracing the digital economy, let's give them a chance to work online.
Water scarcity is likely the most acute threat on a global basis, as you will see in the next 3 videos. But in the Middle East, it presents imminent danger. There are solutions for better water conservation and management in the region, but not necessarily in the hands of those who need it the most. Water scarcity is a common regional enemy that knows no borders, religions, or regimes. Let's spend some time understanding the threat and the already available solutions that are, as you will see, already being shared by states that had a history of war. That brings us to the only conclusion that regional cooperation is the only path forward.
The Middle East is the driest region on Earth, with 12 of the world's most water-scarce countries. Water availability per capita from rain, rivers, and underground sources is 6 times less than the world average. And that amount is expected to be slashed in half by 2050. There are lots of reasons for the crisis. They include climate change and increased demand for water as populations grow. Poor resource management is a problem, and so are wasteful agricultural policies. Water is being lost due to overuse of groundwater, outdated irrigation methods, and even leaky pipes. And that's a problem in a region where 85% of water is consumed by the agricultural sector. Water scarcity is also affecting regional security. In Syria, a devastating drought in the late 2000s triggered the mass migration of 1.5 million people from rural to urban areas. Analysts say the discontent that followed contributed to the 2011 Syrian uprising. More recently, local protests sparked by water shortages have been spreading throughout the region. The hotter temperatures and diminished rainfall from climate change are only expected to make the crisis worse, and those stressors are likely to turn more and more of the region's arable land into desert. That could threaten the food security of hundreds of millions of people. Regional countries have responded differently to the growing water scarcity. Israel and the Gulf states rely on desalination, but experts say that's not a sustainable long-term solution due to its harmful environmental effects. Morocco has worked to improve its groundwater management, while in Jordan, efforts have been made to increase wastewater recycling and reuse. But so much more needs to be done. Governments need to prioritize better management and allocation of water. Improved irrigation policies are a must, and public awareness campaigns around water conservation are critical. Ultimately, greater regional cooperation is needed for Middle Eastern countries to tackle a shared challenge together.
It's projected by the year 2025 that some 60% of the world's landmass and billions of people will find themselves in a water-scarce situation. At a minimum, the world will face economic challenges from this water scarcity. At a maximum, the world will face a grave humanitarian crisis. Hundreds of millions of people suddenly find themselves in places where there once was water, but there no longer is. And therefore, I became concerned about what this would mean for the world at large. I began looking into it, and to my amazement, I discovered that a little country, a very dry country, in the middle of the driest region of the world, had the answers and the solutions to an ever drier world. That country, a country that is 60% desert, is Israel. Sometimes I'm asked, what is the one great part of the Israel water equation? And the answer really isn't that it is only one great thing. but that it's many important things. Israel has a multifaceted, kind of all of the above strategy where they think that there are many techniques that are valuable. And so it's everything from good governance and smart pricing and smart technology and encouraging conservation and constantly encouraging new and better approaches to agriculture, which consumes large amounts of water, constantly challenging itself to make better use of its water in homes and cities. And all of that together has led to a better water story for Israel and soon, I think, for the world. And it's not a surprise that it is drip irrigation that comes out of Israel, or that desalination has made rapid advances in the drop of the price of desalinated water out of Israel. And it's not a surprise that Israel leads the world by a very large margin in the reuse of treated wastewater. Today around the world, 150 countries have some form of engagement with Israel over water. And that's a remarkable number because there aren't 150 countries with which Israel has diplomatic or commercial relations. Water is a way of engaging others. It's a pathway to peace. In March of 2014, the drought in California grew so severe that California Governor Jerry Brown invited the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, to come to California to enter into a formal memorandum of understanding in which Israel and California would work together to try to solve severe problems of California, and most particularly in the area of water scarcity. That same type of cooperation now is going on in state after state in the United States, Colorado and Nevada and many others. Although India famously, at least in the West, is thought of as having massive amounts of water because of the annual monsoon, in fact, the monsoon falls very quickly in a short period of time. It's hard to capture all of that water, and most of it runs off. And so what Israel is helping India to do through the drip irrigation miracle invented in Israel is to find a way to get larger crop yields with actually less water than they've ever used before. For many years, many years, Israel has sent hydrologists and agriculturalists to Egypt, to Jordan, and to other countries to assist them in getting the highest yield for the use of water that they have. It's not widely known, but Israel provides the Palestinian Authority with 55% of the water that it uses in the West Bank and a significant amount of water in Gaza as well. Israel had an open-door policy for Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza, engineers, water administrators from these territories to come into Israel for 5- and 6-day seminars where they would be taught, usually in Arabic, by Israeli agriculturalists and Israeli water scientists on the very best practices that they could take back to their home communities. As Africa rises in its development scale, it will need ever greater amounts of water. And here too, Israel has been a great partner to many, mostly sub-Saharan African nations. It has sent people into Africa to help train them on how to get the highest yield per unit of water. Little by little, these Israeli programs in sub-Saharan Africa have had a profound impact on the lives of really millions of Africans. South America is thought of as a place of enormous water resources, but it is a common misunderstanding that just because a place has a lot of water means that the water is where the people need it. So, for example, in Brazil, the country of the Amazon, the mighty Amazon, the largest source of fresh water in the world, the problem is that just a few hundred miles away in Sao Paulo area, a state that represents about 40 million people, they have water scarcity that is profound and deep. Israel can help them as well in figuring out ways of training people in conservation and making the highest, best use of the water that they have. And that's fortunate because now the world is now going into a situation very similar to what Israel has experienced, but Israel has prepared itself for it. And now the world doesn't have to spend decades doing what Israel did, but simply has to learn from Israel and to adapt those techniques and technologies and practices. Israel is a friend, a partner, and a solution in country after country, region after region.
Of course, poverty, scarcity of vital resources, especially water, and famine and droughts that are common across the region, factor in another critical threat to populations across the Middle East. If due to wars and displacement or due to climate change, food insecurity, especially hard-hit areas like Lebanon and Yemen, have reached a critical level. Mind you, this is not only a Middle East, but rather, as you can see on the next chart, a growing global phenomenon. However, as you will also see, solutions are available, and more are being developed if they are shared across the region in a common cause. New technologies specifically applicable to the deserts, of which the Middle East has plenty, are now available to grow and irrigate crops in desert terrains. Here is one of them.
From deserts to garden, the sand of the future. Can you grow a tropical mango tree in a desert? A few years ago, the answer would have been an obvious no. However, after years of dedicated time and research, we bring you the miraculous technology to plant an entire orchard anywhere, even a desert. Deserts are hostile to any life forms, especially plants. Deserts have characteristic sand that resists any vegetation to grow. These are hot, arid regions with dry weather, scanty water supply, and dunes of infertile, grainy sand. Desert sand is poor in nutrients, void of water, and doesn't allow adequate air to pass between the roots and the environment. With these problems in mind, it would take a miracle to cultivate such a land. And that is precisely what we've made, a miracle. Advancing the scientific tradition of bringing life to impossible ideas, Dake Rexand offers an original and innovative concept of breathable sand. Breathable sand is a superior quality, custom-engineered sand that allows plants to grow and thrive in unsuitable soil conditions. This plant-friendly sand is carefully designed to retain large amounts of water and fertilizer. The sand needs less water and rules out the problem of excess water required by plants. Breathable sand also allows improved air-ground ventilation, helping roots to obtain more oxygen and achieve better growth. Now it is entirely possible to perform agriculture in dry and salinated lands such as deserts and saline alkali soils. This product has a multitude of uses in the fields of forestry and agriculture. With this tried and tested product, entire rice fields can be cultivated with substantially improved growth. Long stretches of uncultivable deserts can be transformed into lively farms. Fruits and vegetables can be grown at a better rate and in higher quantities. All this in a region that deems it impossible to grow any vegetation. Breathable sand technology has shown remarkable outcomes compared to usual sand, promising increased weight and number of grains in rice plants. This remarkable technology is more than just an agricultural tool. The advent of this technology has implications beyond the scope of its uses. It offers a sustainable solution to a wide range of problems, including food and water scarcity in deserts, rapidly forming wastelands, desertification, slow plant growth, salinity, and even climate change. Having this modern dream in our hands in flesh and blood, a sustainable future for agriculture is now at our disposal. We now have the power to breathe life into the deserts.
Refugees and displacement in the Middle East is possibly the most serious, if not critical, to the stability of the region and beyond, through the Mediterranean to the shores of Europe, mainly Greece, and from there through the Balkans to seek refuge in European countries that are part of the Schengen area. The Schengen area is an area comprising of 26 European countries that have officially abolished all passport and all other types of border control at the mutual borders, which makes them an attractive destination for people who are fleeing from civil war zones like Syria through Turkey. The human displacement and refugee crisis in the Middle East is a four-dimensional crisis. First, 3 generations of refugees have been living in UNRWA, United Nations camps for 75 years now in the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan. This is attributed to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which we reviewed in detail in an earlier lecture, and whose plight and grievances are well documented. Then there are refugees from civil war-torn countries and other conflict, mainly from Syria, Iraq, and Yemen, who fled to neighboring countries in the millions, once again to Jordan and Lebanon mainly. Then there are millions of refugees who were displaced in their own country, for example, the Kurds in Syria. And then there are the refugees, migrants, who risked their lives to reach the shores of Europe. In all these jurisdictions, the refugees destabilized the region, burdened already creating economies, and resulted in millions living in subhumane conditions.
Life returns slowly to normal in Gaza under the Israeli occupation. Arab inhabitants accept the situation philosophically. But at Shuk al-Arish, there has been much underground Egyptian activity, and Israeli patrols carry out a house-to-house search, checking identities to guard against hostile infiltration. UNRWA has taken over the care of thousands of refugees living in the Gaza suburbs. Food supplies arrive regularly, and milk is issued 3 times a week, so much for each member of the family. How much of the family ration finds its way home is anybody's guess, as collection is left to the children. Milk is a luxury to them, and who can blame them for a taste before getting home?
More and more advanced technologically driven solutions to mitigate climate change and avoid a global catastrophe are being developed, tested, and deployed by new and innovative companies dedicated to this cause. It is the industry of the future, and its best testing ground is the Middle East. In fact, as you can see in the next chart, Israel is not alone in developing technological and infrastructure solutions to combat climate change. Major projects are being undertaken in all parts of the Middle East.
My name is Tobias Bork, and I'm the Research Fellow for Middle East Security Studies here at RUSI. Earlier this month, the UN Climate Change Conference, COP26, concluded in Glasgow. In the end, much of the discussion about the outcomes of the conference were about coal and how soon countries around the world can stop using coal as a source of energy. In the coming years, the focus will shift to how and how quickly countries around the world can stop using oil and gas as well. And that will put the spotlight on the Middle East. In fact, I believe that climate change could well be the defining issue shaping developments in the Middle East for decades to come. I think it has the potential to reshape the region's geopolitics and to become a real existential threat to many countries around the region. It is pretty clear that for the last 100 years or so, oil and gas have been key to shaping the Middle East international relations. Securing access to oil and gas has been a key factor driving international intervention in and engagement with the Middle East from the colonial era until today. And within the region itself, oil and gas have shaped the regional balance of power. Countries like Saudi Arabia, the UAE and Qatar have become richer and arguably more influential and powerful than countries without the same natural resource wealth. And so I think it's only reasonable to project that while the world's demand for oil and gas have shaped the region as we know today, the world's decarbonization will have a profound impact on what the region will look like in decades to come. Now, let me just briefly focus on the Gulf monarchies to explain how I think both the effects of climate change and climate action pose enormous and potentially existential challenges to their governments. The Gulf states are not just amongst the world's leading producers of oil and gas, they also rank very highly in terms of per capita emissions. So decarbonization means that they need to fundamentally transform their economic models. Now, just ahead of COP26, Saudi Arabia said that it would reach net zero emissions by 2060, and the UAE says it will do the same by 2050. But while all the Gulf states are already trying to implement economic diversification strategies, they still have a very long way to go. And in order to finance their economic reforms at home, they still need the revenue from selling oil and gas abroad. But as countries around the world are decarbonizing, that window is closing. And so the pressure on governments across the Gulf states is only going to increase over the coming years. They need to move faster, and they will have to become more creative as they try to change their economic systems. And at the same time, the Gulf region and the Middle East as a whole are amongst the parts of the world in which the effects of climate change, and specifically rising temperatures, are already most acutely felt. Now, the summer months have always been very hot in the Gulf, but in recent years, temperatures have been increasing ever further, and that is set to continue. So in the next few years, there's a real possibility that some of the Gulf states could experience days, maybe even weeks at a time, during which temperatures reach levels that are simply too hot to endure for human beings. And so, in short, as we're moving on from COP26 and towards COP27 and 28, both of which will actually take place in the Middle East, first in Egypt and then the UAE, I think it's pretty clear that both climate change and climate action will be amongst the most important issues for the Middle East in the coming decades. They will shape the region's international relations and have a decisive impact on its political and economic development.
In a part of the world already hot and dry, climate change is sweeping across the Middle East with scorching temperatures and even less rainfall. More land here will become desert. That will lead many Middle Eastern countries to struggle to find water and other resources, making a volatile region even more dangerous.
Much of the turmoil that we've seen in the recent Middle East has a link to climate change.
In Syria, drought forced farmers into cities where they couldn't find work, one of the sparks of the civil war that still rages. This desert climate expert says expect to see more of what he calls climate refugees, people on the move heading from rural to urban areas.
As climate makes it more and more difficult to make a living, they're going to have to go where they can.
Israel, a developed nation, may be hit less hard by climate change. About 60% of the country is desert, bringing its own challenges.
The Mediterranean Sea helped avert a water crisis in Israel. Engineers built several plants, just like this one, which now produces most of the water that Israelis use at home and drink.
Desalination of seawater now provides 70% of Israel's domestic consumption, and it's relatively cheap. The problem is it's a technology that hasn't been adopted in other parts of the Middle East, leaving scientists worried much of the region is unprepared for the coming climate change storm. Derek Stoffel, CBC News, near Tel Aviv.
The questions are, is enough being done? And is it being done fast enough? And what needs to be done? And who will do it? Can in fact the Middle East region, that on aggregate is reasonably behind the world in the progress, if not the need, to combat climate change, as it has spent too much time and blood combating each other? Of course it can be done. It must be done. And the Middle East region in unison can do it better than any region of the world if it cooperated and collaborated as a Middle East Union. What is needed to do it on a commercial rather than experimental large scale is first a sense of urgency, which 59 degrees Celsius in Baghdad and Qatar in the summer of 2021 may accelerate. It takes huge investments, and who's got the money for it? Well, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar are the richest countries in the region, and eventually the main beneficiaries of this effort in terms of economic growth and employment, etc. China will be the first of non-Middle East countries to open their wallet, as it may be one of their best economic and even political investments and is strategic to their economic development. Technology? Israel has got it in spades, not just in startup mode, but with production-grade tested and implemented solutions for years now. Where are you going to build these wind power and or solar power farms? Saudi Arabia is mostly a desert country with massive arid inhabitable land. It could become the geographical center for clean energy power generation and transportation to the entire region. How can it be done? Only through a joint regional cooperative commitment. A Middle East European Union, maybe. Regulation could be fast-tracked by creating a regional regulatory body to circumvent the lethargic regulatory regime in each of the Middle Eastern countries. Finally, the execution and administration of this massive effort should be handed to the younger generation who are presently unemployed. It is a generational opportunity. Yes, we can. In a prior lecture, we talked about the technology innovation that produced proven solutions to these major challenges facing the Middle East. We now begin to see a series of regional agreements, mainly between Israel and its neighboring countries, Egypt, Jordan, and Lebanon, and even Syria. It is a start, and in my opinion, only the beginning of an era of cooperation and collaboration born out of sheer necessity. The next phase will require Saudi Arabia, whose Vision 2030 largely depends on regional cooperation, to join the club. As a recent example, just weeks ago, Israel and Jordan signed an agreement by which Israel will supply Jordan with 25% of its water needs, while 8% of Israel's renewable energy will originate in Jordan. The economic peace renders the political peace essential. Knowing the history of the Middle East, it almost appears naive to sound so optimistic about the future of the Middle East. It reminds me of an important anecdote I wish to share with you. Some 15 years or so ago, I received a call from my brother in Israel. He told me that the then head of the Israeli Mossad is spending an evening in Toronto incognito on his way to some fundraising event in Ottawa the next day. My brother served under Meir Dagan, then the head of the Mossad, during his army service and befriended him on a personal and family level. He asked me if I would take him to dinner, which of course I did. At the dinner, I asked him the question he heard from everybody all the time. Will there ever be peace in the Middle East, and more specifically between Israel and the Palestinians? Without hesitation, he responded, "Not in your lifetime." So I asked why. I will never forget what he told me. Not until there's a consensus in Israel as to the vision of peace, and not before the Arab states in the region will have something to gain by promoting such peace. It is at least the latter, and with the new government, maybe this time has come or will soon, and hopefully during my lifetime. But this is the Middle East. What is true today may not be true given the tendency to underestimate continuity. In moments where radical change seems imminent, it is worth recalling that much often remains the same over time. But if this were to be the case, and in the face of the challenges that we described in this lecture, by 2050 some areas of the Arab Gulf may be rendered inhabitable. The next two slides are a repeat from a prior lecture, but that I find them to be a perfect ending to our lecture series. I would like to thank you for listening and engaging with my favorite topic, the Middle East. Before we depart and hand you the non-certificate certificate as my thank you, I created a Middle East quiz for you, which unfortunately, because of this being recorded, we will pause long enough for you to copy the link. Please do not share your score with anyone, as it is not a final exam and you already passed anyways. So just before I bid you goodbye, listen to some practical good advice to when you visit the Middle East next. Shalom. So now is the time for the pessimist to turn ahead and look backwards and say that in the Middle East, the culture of compromise is non-existent. When countries of the region come together, each makes exorbitant demands, that there are oil-rich sheikhdom and poor countries in the region. One cannot expect those sheiks to share their newly found wealth with the neighbors, that the region has dictatorships almost everywhere. Dictatorships do not cooperate easily, and that many years ago the rulers of Egypt, Syria, and Libya came together and announced that they formed something like a United Arab Republic. The Egyptian President Nasser crying while announcing the decision, and then they went back to their respective countries and it was business as usual. So they were not even serious. So really, is the Middle East going to go forward? But then the optimist will say that evidence is coming that the political economy of Middle Eastern nations is too diverse to put in one mold, but it is safe to say that a desire for transformation is sweeping across the region, that the resource-rich nations are undertaking long overdue economic diversification reform programs as commodity markets become increasingly risky, as evidenced by, for instance, Saudi Arabia's Vision 2030. That in resource-poor nations, debt, fiscal constraints, and ineffective governance have instigated public anger and mistrust that is too strong for politicians to overcome with simple political concession. And finally, with climate change catastrophe looming, there's no way but forward.
You know him from the Axis of Evil comedy tour and Friday After Next And now his new special, I Come in Peace, is out. So get it now, because he's got to do his own voiceover for this commercial if you don't.
Middle Easterners, we love selling stuff, man. Eugene, you ever try to buy anything from a Middle Easterner before? Okay, here's my tip to my friends that have never hung out with Middle Easterners, never tried to buy anything from us. Here's a tip. If you're ever in a deal situation with a Middle Easterner, if they say, my friend, you're about to get screwed. Okay? They are not your friend. Because Eugene, I actually fell for this one time, because I grew up in America. I forgot about the whole my friend rule. I was in Morocco. I was visiting Morocco, and I was walking. At the time, I was just out of college, living with my mom, so I had a little room. I had nowhere to even put a rug, so I should not be going into a rug store. But I'm walking by the Moroccan guy. My friend. He's at the rug store. My friend. And I was like, me? Oh, yeah, my friend. Come on. I was like, he's so nice. He's my friend. I went there. Eugene, they give you free stuff. He goes, have a seat here. Have minty. Have some minty. Started giving me free mint tea. I was like, wow, this is so nice. We're friends, he's giving me tea. Then a little time goes by, he goes, my friend, today's a beautiful day. My friend, which 10 rugs would you like to buy? I go, no, man, I live at home. I got nowhere to put a rug. I'm okay. He goes, my friend, relax, have some mint tea. Shh. My friend, which 3? Take 3 rugs, just go. I go, no, I can't. I don't have a place to go. Shh. Mint tea, relax. Then he goes, my friend, look at my kids. They have to eat. Buy the rugs. Eugene, I bought 3 rugs. I had nowhere to put them. For 6 months, I drove around Los Angeles with 3 rugs in the trunk of my car. Trying to sell them to relatives. Every party. My friend, come here, my friend. Have some minty, glove compartment, minty.
I Come in Peace, available now on iTunes, Amazon.com, and anywhere else you can find comedy. Batteries not included.